do a complete 180 on a band? Can you go from hating a band to loving a band? It's easy to go from loving a band to hating them because things happen. A good example, Lost Prophets would be a great example of where people went from loving a band to hating them. So throw that in there, but just
too soon.
Do we hate the band or do we just hate their front man?
You kind of start feeling sorry for the rest of the band at some point. There's a bit of a latter going on there, but yeah, I'm intrigued. Can you go from hating a band to loving a band? And have you guys had any experience where you've got a band that you've come across, you've listened to the band, not just like you've seen a gimmick and you're like, I'm not into that, but you've heard the band, you've heard their music, and you're like, do you know what? This is bloody not for me. I can't stand this. This is awful. And then for whatever reason, you've switched and you've actually gone, do you know what? This is freaking amazing. This is brilliant. Not just so that you can tolerate it. And I'm just sure, I don't know. I was struggling to think. I found there are bands that I've listened to that I wasn't massively into. I didn't hate them. I just wasn't really, I had no awareness of them. And I came to them later in life. There are bands I don't like and I've never really got into. So like Tool is a band that I've not hated, but there's nothing in them that I've listened to that I like. And I've gone back to them years later and I still don't like them. I'm still not really connecting with it. So I just don't know if it is actually possible. Can you go from hating a band to loving a band? Any examples?
For me...
Oh, right, let's move on then. Okay.
No, Sticks has got one.
I've got one. Yeah.
Go on, Sticks, what you got?
I hated Bullet for My Valentine to begin with. Couldn't stand them, but now I love them.
And what was the reason? Why did you hate them?
I have no idea. I just didn't really connect with the music at all. It wasn't for me at first. I didn't like the riffs, didn't like his voice, just wasn't a fan. And I don't know what the turning point was. It just came on Spotify on playlist one day. And I thought, I really like this track. Who is it? And it was a Bullet track. And then I ended up listening to more and more and ended up loving them.
Interesting, because I know a lot of people didn't get into Bullet for My Valentine when they heard about how their parents had bought them all their gear and how they got a big step up in life, because that was what I peeved off. They didn't feel that Bullet for My Valentine had paid their dues.
I didn't know that.
I've not looked into a massive amount of detail on this. This is just when I ask people about Bullet for My Valentine, they're like, no, they got bought onto a tour and they got their parents bought onto their parents are rich and they paid for them to go in and record their first album, and they didn't feel they'd worked and grafted. So a lot of people automatically just were like, I'm not listening to them because they've not had to do the legwork. They got a leg up way too quickly. And they thought of them as rich boys that just kind of got like Eton boys kind of, I don't know, they weren't Eton, but that sort of mentality of bands. But interesting that you kind of switched over to them, because I've never been a massive fan of them, but I can appreciate them. Don't love them, but I do appreciate them. Kirk, you said you had one.
Yeah, the one example I can think of, I actually did hate Soulfly when they came out, because obviously Sepultura have split up. Max just goes straight into the new metal world, doesn't he, with that album? And I just thought the first two albums were shocking. It's just crap. You're not offering anything new. And then the last three have been fantastic. Really like Beneath the Remains, but he's incorporating the groove metal in the Obituary and some of the guests they're getting on there. So they've actually turned the corner. And to me, they're probably one of the finest death thrash bands around at the moment now, Soulfly, even though they've been doing it since '98. I think Music are the best example of a band who were utter shite to begin with, who then became one of the most influential. And I mentioned him earlier, probably is Depeche Mode. Those first two albums are so poor. I just can't get enough. Dreadful pop music. And then in 1983, they do this album, Construction Time Again. And they were one of the first to use samples. They took the influence of that German proto-industrial band, Einstürzende Neubauten.
Oh, that one, yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
One of you have heard of them. Nice. And they put that in a pop format. And then...
I thought you say Kraftwerk.
Well, they were obviously an influence. By 1988, that Music for the Masses album, they've more or less defined electronic music for an alternative and even a rock audience. So they're the best example of that happening, where a lot of people who would never touch that music by 1986's Black Celebration album were intrigued. And then the opposite has happened with Ministry. They started off as Depeche Mode clones and were shit. And then when they started embracing thrash metal and more or less invented industrial metal, people started liking them because they got their own identity. But it's hard, isn't it, for anyone for their own pride to think, oh, I hate that band and now I'm going to swallow that pride and I really enjoy them. You're probably not going to do it for that reason alone, are you? Just to maintain this stubborn pride.
But yeah, if it's not just down to music, if there's something about the band separate to the music that you don't like, it's a lot harder to change your opinion. But if it's just musical, then I think you can switch. Andy, you're quite what I would call a gatekeeper kind of what you like. So I think what about yourself? Has there been something that you've come across over the years that you've come back to maybe a few years later and you've actually really enjoyed it?
I'm struggling to answer the question in the true context, but what I can contribute is Pantera. Now, I'm probably going to be absolutely slated and criticised, but I've only recently, in the last year or two, actually listened to and really enjoyed Pantera. When they were big in the 90s, they weren't heavy enough for me. They weren't powerful enough for me. They weren't rough enough in the vocal department for me. So I just overlooked them. And like Sticks, you hear a song on a playlist. I mean, I knew a couple of songs, but when you sort of go beyond the singles and the videos, there's some really good stuff there. And that's probably the best example I can put to this sort of conversation. I didn't hate them, just weren't a band that I liked that were what everybody else did, or a lot of people did. They were very popular. I just sort of kind of ignored them, almost out of pride, because I thought, oh no, I'm too death metal for liking Pantera. But they're a fucking great band, and I feel a bit foolish for not being in them when they were releasing albums.
So you should.
I'm 20 years behind the times, 30 years behind the times.
How about you, Dave? Any bands that have done that for you?
Yes, I've got two actually. One of them is actually Black Label Society.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. When I first heard them, at the time I was into Slipknot, Soulfly, early Mudvayne, Taproot, that kind of area. Yeah, deep dive. That kind of area of music. And then someone showed me like this big fucking Viking looking motherfucker that played guitar and sung like Ozzy Osbourne. I listened to it and I didn't like the vocals. I was like, nah, shit. And then left it for like, I don't know, I'd probably say like 10 years. Completely just didn't get into it. And then exactly the same as what Stick said, something came on, thought, oh, yes, please. Completely turned around. I can't say that I hated them, but the vocals put me off. So I completely get it when people listen to like Black Label, they're like, and they've got like comments on the vocals. It's specific, he sounds the way he sounds. So I get it. And the other one was Ghost.
Okay.
When it first came out, just the music, I thought, I don't quite understand it. Not sure I get it. So again, I left it. Wasn't quite for me. It wasn't quite 80s. Like I love 80s music. It wasn't quite 80s. It wasn't quite synth. It wasn't quite goth. It wasn't quite really anything at the time. The closest thing you could put to it was maybe pop, like heavy rock. But, okay. And then when the whole package came out, when they were picked up from their first EP, and suddenly the theatrics were there, you're like, okay. Yes, it makes sense. It makes sense. They've got the lore. They've created almost this comic book like person. So yeah, it made more sense. So yeah, Ghost was the other one.
Okay. How about you, Alan? Anything from you?
I've spent the time everybody else has been talking, trying to think about it, to be honest. The only band that, and I suppose that the only way I could put this is the biggest swing for me from dismissing something as not for me, or no, I'm not really keen on that or whatever, was the first time I heard Lamb of God. And I heard them for the first time when I was very much I was listening to the album while I was working, probably 20 years ago. Might be a little bit less than that, but anyway, I think it was the Walk With Me in Hell album. I can't remember what album name that is, but anyway, I I heard a few tracks off that and I was like, God, this is far too much for me. This is far too aggressive. This is way too sort of almost guttural. I know Andy will laugh at me for saying that, but still, it was way too deep in the depths for me. And then the swing for me was in my old band, we played a show in Leicester, and the DJ just before we came on played Redneck, and I was like, what is this? Where has this been all my life? And I made a beat, so much so that we played a 45-minute set, and yet the first thing I did was went to the sound man and said, what was that song you played before we went on? And he said, oh, it's by Lamb. I said, really? I've never really been into them. He said, check out this and this. And then a few weeks later, they released the Wrath album, and that was me sold. Yeah, that album, I had that on CD, and I played it so much it broke. But that was probably the biggest swing for me. I almost had a chuckle to myself, like when I was listening to that Wrath album, because I was like, you didn't like this lot, while I'm like headbanging down the A507 on the way home. And they were. I suppose that was because my musical tastes were changing, as opposed to I thought they were rubbish and then actually they were brilliant. It was just that I kind of, I suppose, matured into them as a way of putting it. But that's the biggest swing for me I can think of off the top of my head anyway.
It's been interesting, actually. It's been good, actually, you guys talking about it. It's given me a chance to actually think for myself. And I do have an example, and I actually think I know why. Because it's in each of our occasions, it's all been exactly the same reason of how we've come back to the band. So it's all been a case of that we've been listening to, we've heard them, and we've not connected with the music. It's been something about it, and there's been one song that's connected. And I bet you that when you've then connected with that band over that one song, when you've gone back to the old stuff that you didn't connect with previously, you can actually appreciate it more. You can enjoy the older stuff that you previously had said wasn't a big fan of that. You're like, actually, that's not bad, because you found a way of getting into that band. But you've got to find the right song that connects with you. And like the one that was the band that was for me was In Flames. And about 3 years ago, I was getting loads of requests on my other YouTube channel to do reactions to In Flames tracks. Stuff like off of, was it Lunar Moon or Luna, I think it's called. Jester's Race was the other album I was getting a lot of requests for. And I was listening to this stuff, and it's all shredding along. It's scratchy, guttural vocals, and I'm just like... Ugh. And I remember doing the reviews of him going, yeah, it seems like he knows what he's playing, but the vocals, I just don't like them. I don't like these vocals. They're scratchy. They don't make any sense. The lyrics don't make any sense. It's just not for me. I don't really get it. I don't understand it. I don't really want to listen to it again. And so those people go, yeah, but check out this version. Check out this song. I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, right? Okay, I'll react to that one. My opinion didn't change, and I kept doing it until we got to more modern In Flames. And some of their style had changed. And I started doing more recent In Flames from like the last sort of 10 years or so, and really got into it. I liked how they'd modernized their sound. And then someone asked me to go back and check out some stuff off of Jester's Race the other week. And I listened to it. I was like, this is a banging track. I really enjoy this. And I was going, I swear I've reacted to this before, but I don't remember actually enjoying it. But I really enjoy this track right now. And I think that's because I'd gone through that journey. Part of what you said, Alan, your tastes change. Because of what you're listening to and the stuff that you're into at the time, your ears change. It's another reason when we were talking about like production, when you're doing your production, you go a bit ear blind as well. So your ears become acclimatized to certain sounds. So if you're listening to all that sort of style of music, you become more acclimatized, more accepting of it. So when I was listening to like more modern In Flames, I could actually go back and I could accept what I was hearing more. And I think that so it probably is true. You can go from hating a band to loving a band, but you've got to find something to get you into that journey. I think listening to the same stuff that you hated is not going to do it. You've got to find somewhere else to appreciate it from. But